It always came home.
The calf's hoof caught Risten under the ribs, and she felt something there give a small wet crack. And still she did not let go. She had it by the neck, by the loose hide and the soaked fur, and the rope that had gone around its throat wrong, and the river had the rest of it. The river wanted the legs. The river was pulling the animal apart with her in the middle of the argument. Meltwater, kind that comes off the high snow in spring and remembers being ice. It had stopped feeling like cold somewhere back near the bank. Now it felt like teeth. Like something living had closed its jaw around her legs below the knee and was working slowly upward toward the bone, patient, taking its time, and the only warm thing left in the whole black world was the calf's panicked breath hitting the side of her face. "Pull, you stupid," she said to it, to herself, to the rope. The current shoved. Her foot found a stone, and the stone turned over. She went down to the shoulder and came up spitting, and that was when the river took her sleeve. The wool was old. It had been her mother's, and then it had been nobody's, and then it had been hers, which was the order most things came to her in, and it was rotten at the seam from years of someone else's sweat. And the water simply opened it along the shoulder like a hand parting a curtain. Cloth peeled back, the cold hit her bare skin, and the dark went gold. Not the torches. The torches were behind her, on the bank, a row of them held high, in the fists of people who had come to watch the useless girl drown a calf she had been ordered to save. This was not that light. This came from under her own skin. It came from her shoulder, where the river had stripped her, a thread of it first, then a branching, then a whole spreading rootwork of molten gold crawling down toward her elbow, veins of fire opening one after another beneath the surface, throwing their light up onto the moving water so that the river itself glowed around her, like something had spilled a lantern of melted sun into the snowmelt. She could see her own hand, lit from the inside. On the bank, shouting stopped. All of it. Every voice at once, as if the same fist had closed around every throat. The dogs quit. The torches did not move. 40 faces she had spent her whole life flinching away from, hung there in the dark above the water, lit now not by their own flames, but by her, by the thing pouring out of her shoulder, and not one of them was looking half anymore. The calf. She still had the calf. Her arms had not been told to let go, and so they had not, and the small animal thrashed once more against her chest, and then, oddly, went still, as though the light had reached it too. Across the water, a woman's voice came out flat and low, and cut itself off halfway. "That is the mountains, Mint." Berit Sarah did not finish it. The old woman's hand came up to her own mouth as if to push the rest of the word back down, her throat, and she took a step backward, off the edge of the torchlight, into the dark where Risten could no longer see her face. That word, half of it that made it across the river. It hung over the water with the smoke. It is an old word, and most of you will not have heard it, and Risten herself had heard it only once before. From her mother in a fever, in the last bad winter. And her mother had not finished it either. The people who know what that word means do not say it out loud. They keep it the way you keep a knife you are afraid of. Sheathed in the dark, taken out only when there is no other choice left. If you have ever wondered what your own people might be keeping from you, half a word, snatched back the second it starts, you already understand why I am telling you to stay. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because the rest of that word is the rest of this story, and I am not going to say it twice. The mountain does not repeat it itself, neither will I. Now, back to the river where the gold was still climbing. A man came off the bank. He came fast and without a torch, which meant he came into water he could not see. And the clan made a sound when he did. One breath drawn between many mouths, because nobody told Mathis Gop to go into the river, and nobody could have stopped him. He hit the current at a run, and the current hit back, and he leaned into it the way you lean into a hard wind, head down, both arms out for balance, and he did not slow when he reached the deep part where the stones turned over. He waded to her. He came on until the black water was at his waist, and the glow off her shoulder lit the underside of his jaw. His wet hair stuck black across his face, the heavy fur on his shoulders gone heavy and dark with the river, dragging at him, and he did not seem to feel it. She braced for the hand at her hair, for the fist. She had learned to read men by their hands, and she got ready to be pulled, or pushed, or held under, because surely this was the thing the clan had wanted all along. Surely the useless one glowing in the dark was a thing that needed putting out. He did not take out a knife. He knelt. In the middle of the river, in the cold that ate the marrow, Mathis Gop folded down onto his knees in the current until the water came up to his collarbones and his eyes were level with hers and level with the burning gold on her shoulder. And he looked at the mark the way she had never once in her life been looked at. And his face was wrong. She had expected disgust, and there was no disgust in it. She had expected the contempt that everyone wore for her like a coat, and it was not there either. What was there she did not have a word for? Because it was the kind of look a person gives a grave. A long-dug grave they have walked to in the dark for years. Hunger and grief sitting in the same face at the same time, neither one winning. He raised his hand toward the light, slow. The way you reach toward a fire you have been cold for a very long time, knowing it will burn you, reaching anyway. His fingers stopped a breath from her skin. It is the same. Not to her, to no one. His voice had gone to almost nothing under the noise of the water. It is exactly the same. The calf chose that moment to come alive again, kicking, and the river surged, and the whole frozen world snapped back into motion at once. Mathis closed his hand around her arm, the lit one, right over the gold, and his grip did not hurt. He stood and brought her up with him and the calf with her, and the three of them stumbled together toward the bank through water that fought every step, and the gold under his hand kept burning. And she could feel it now, she realized. She could feel the mark. Warm where the rest of her was dead with cold. Warm and somehow glad. Dog that has finally been let off its chain. They came out of the river into a wall of people who did not move to help. She had expected that. Hands had never come for her before, and she had not let herself hope they would start. Now, what she had not expected was the silence holding. 40 of them and not one word. They parted to let Mathis through, and they stared at her shoulder as she passed. And a child near the front, a small one she did not know, reached out toward the light before its mother snatched the hand back and pressed it flat against the child's chest and held it there. That was the only thing anyone did. Pull a hand back, as though the light might be catching. Let me take you back, before the river. 3 days. So you can feel what she was. She ate last. That is the simplest way to say it and the cruelest, because in a clan that lived through the dark half of the year on dried meat and what the herd could spare, last meant cold. Last meant the bottom of the pot where the fat had gone gray and stiff and the broth had cooled to a film. Risten ate it with her fingers, standing, because there was no place set for her at the fire, and there never had been. And she ate it fast, the way you eat a thing that might be taken, and she had been doing this so long that she no longer remembered it as a wound. It was simply the shape of the day. The others sat. She stood. The others were warm. She was not. Her place to sleep was by the door of the turf house, the spot everyone called the cold corner, where the draft came under the hide flap all night long and laid itself across whoever was unlucky enough to be lying there. That spot was hers the way her mother's rotten coat was hers. Handed down. Nobody else's problem. In the mornings, she was sent to the work the dogs would not do. The frozen work, the dangerous footing, the climb after a strayed animal up a scree slope where a turned ankle in that country was a death sentence dressed up as an errand. They did not say they hoped she would not come back. They did not have to. Barrett Sarah had a way of looking at her over the top of whatever she was mending, a flat, measuring look you give a stretch of bad weather you are waiting out. And once, only once, the old woman had said the thing out loud. A girl who cannot herd, Verrett had said, not even unkindly, which was the worst of it, is a girl we feed for nothing. Come the thaw, she goes down to the mission. They take ones like her. It is the only charity in it. The mission, down the valley road. Risten knew what the valley road was. Everyone her age knew. There had been a boy, 4 winters back, a boy with a clubbed foot who could not keep up the migrations. And one gray morning, the boy had been walked down to where the road left the high country, and a man in a black coat had been waiting, and the boy had gone with him, and the clan had come back up the mountain lighter by one mouth, and nobody had said his name again. Not once. It was as if the cold had simply closed over the place where he used to be, the way the river closes over a stone. She used to lie in the cold corner and think about that road, about being the next thing walked down it, about the man in the black coat and his waiting, patient hands. There was one thing she had that the others did not, and she had learned to hide it the way you hide a limp from a buyer. She could feel the herd before the herd knew itself. She would wake in the black middle of the night, already sitting up, already certain. A wrongness laid across her skin like a change in the wind, and she would know. The way you know a tooth is going bad before it aches, that the herd was about to break. That a wolf had come down off the ridge, that a doe 3 valleys of animals deep was about to drop a calf into the snow. The dogs would catch it minutes later. The men minutes after that. By the time the camp was awake and shouting, Risten had already been awake a quarter hour, lying still in the cold corner with her eyes open, saying nothing because a useless girl is fed for nothing. But a strange girl is something else. A strange girl draws the wrong eyes. A strange girl ends up walked down a road of her own. So she swallowed it. Every time. She felt the storms come, and the wolves move, and the calves turn in the womb, and she lay in the dark, and let the dogs take the credit. She told no one, and she had told no one for so long that she had half convinced herself it was nothing. A trick of poor sleep, fancy of a girl with too much cold and too little to eat. The calf in the river had been one of hers. One of the ones she had felt. She had woken 3 nights ago, knowing it would go into the water, and she had said nothing, because what was there to say? And then, this morning it had gone into the water exactly as she knew it would. And the men had stood on the bank and looked at the useless girl, and Mathis had pointed with his chin and said, "Go." And so she had gone, now, back to the bank, where she stood dripping in the torchlight, with the gold still moving under the skin of her arm. And the whole clan ringed around her, not saying one single word. Mathis still had her by the arm. He turned his head and found Barrett Sarah in the dark at the edge of the light, and Risten saw the old woman's face come back into the torchlight as she stepped forward, and the look on it now was not the flat measuring look. It was fear. Plain fear on a face Risten had never once seen afraid of anything. Barrett's eyes went to the mark, and then to Mathis's hand on the mark, and then to Mathis's face, and whatever she read there made her go a shade grayer. Mathis! Barrett's voice had a warning folded into it, low for him alone, the whole silent ring could hear. You know what that is. You, of all the living, know what that is. Put her down to the river and let it finish what it started, and let us, none of us, ever speak of this. Bring her to the fire. He said it over the top of the old woman, as if she had not spoken. His voice was quiet, and it carried the way. Quiet things carry when 40 people have stopped breathing to hear them. The good fire, dry wool, the dried meat, the back fat, the part we keep. A sound went through the clan then. Not a word. A shifting. The part we keep was the part nobody got. The part hoarded against the worst weeks of the deep winter, when the difference between that meat and no meat was the difference between a clan in spring and a row of frozen bundles. And to spend it now, on a night in early thaw, on her, on the girl who ate cold from the bottom of the pot, was a thing so far outside the order of the world that even Risten felt the wrongness of it land in her stomach like a swallowed stone. Barrett Sarah stopped arguing. That frightened Risten more than anything the old woman could have said. Barrett, who argued with the weather, who argued with the priest, the one time a priest had come up the mountain, who had never in living memory let another person have the last word, simply closed her mouth and stepped back and let it happen, and as she stepped back, her eyes met Risten's across the firelit dark, and there was something in them that was almost an apology, and an apology from Barrett Sarah was the most terrifying thing Risten had ever been given. They brought her to the fire, the good one, the one in the headman's house, fed thick and high, the heat of it a thing she had only ever felt at a distance through the wall, while she lay in her cold corner on the other side of it. Someone put dry wool around her shoulders, real wool, heavy and clean, and the warmth of it after the river made her whole body shake so hard her teeth knocked. Someone else crouched in front of her and pressed food into her hands. The back fat, the kept meat, the good, dark, dried strips of it that she had smelled cooking on feast nights and had never once tasted, laid now across her 2 cupped palms by hands that 3 days ago had set the cold gray pot down in front of her, without looking at her face. She did not understand it. She understood almost nothing of what was happening to her. But she was starving. She was always starving. The river had taken what little the day had given her, and the cold had burned the rest, and the smell of that meat reached the animal in her that had been hungry since before she could remember being anything else. And she ate. She ate fast, the way she always ate, in case it was taken back. And across the fire, through the heat shimmer and the rising sparks, Mathis Gopp sat down on his heels and watched her eat. He did not touch his own food. He did not speak. He simply watched her, patient, still, the unhurried attention of a man looking at something whose end he has already seen and already decided, the way a man looks at a debt that has, finally, after long years, come back up the mountain to be paid. She ate because she was starving. She did not yet know that she was being fed. "Show me your hands," Barrett Sara said. Risten gave them over. "You did not refuse, Barrett, a thing she asked for," in that flat voice, and so she held both hands out across the morning fire, palms up, and the old woman took the right one by the wrist and turned it to the light. The grip was hard. Harder than it needed to be. Barrett's thumb pressed into the soft place below Risten's own thumb, and Risten felt the bruise start there, even as the old woman stared, and she made herself stand still and let it happen. Because she had spent her whole life learning that stillness cost less than anything else. The staring went on too long. Barrett was not looking at the hand the way you look at a hand. She was looking at it the way you look at a wound that has healed wrong, or a track in the snow that should not be there, and Risten followed her eyes down to her skin and understood slowly what the old woman was seeing. The hands were soft. 3 weeks ago, they had been split across every knuckle, the cracks gone black with cold and reopening every morning, palms a map of old rope burn and new. Now the cracks had closed. The skin had gone smooth over them. There was a callus or two left at the base of the fingers, fading, but the hands in the firelight were the hands of a girl who had not done a hard day's work in the better part of a month, and that, Risten realized, was exactly the thing. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of not being worked raw. Britt dropped the wrist, as though it had turned hot in her grip. She did not say a word. She stood, and her knees cracked the way old knees do, and she walked out of the turf house into the gray light. And she did not look back, and Risten was left holding her own soft hands out over the fire, with the bruise of the old woman's thumb already darkening below her own. That was the new shape of things. People looked at her now and went quiet and walked away. She had not been sent up a scree slope in 3 weeks, had not gone after a strayed animal in the dark, had not been handed the frozen work the dogs would not do. In the mornings now, she woke in the cold corner, out of old habit, and then remembered that the cold corner was not hers anymore either. A place had been cleared for her nearer. The fire that someone had laid down a reindeer hide there, with the fur still thick on it, and that she slept warm. She ate from the middle of the pot, sometimes from the top, where the fat was. No one looked at her while she did it. No one stopped her, and that was its own strange weather. That absence of stopping after a life in which everything had been stopped. What she could not get used to was the herd. They had started bringing her to the animals on purpose. The first time, a knot of the does had broken in the gray before dawn. Spooked by something off the ridge, the whole group of them wheeling and stamping in the churned snow, with their eyes rolled white, and the calves bawling in the middle of it, and the men had been shouting, and the dogs running themselves stupid and getting nowhere, and Mathis had turned and looked at her across the chaos, and jerked his chin towards the animals same ways he had jerked it toward the river. "Go," Chin said. So she had gone, not knowing what she was supposed to do. She had walked into the middle of the breaking herd, the way you walk into deep water, slow, hands a little, out from her sides, and the does had wheeled around her. And she had felt the wrongness coming off them in waves, same wrongness she had spent her whole life lying still in the dark and swallowing, except now she did not swallow it. She let it come into her. She stood in the middle of all that animal panic and let it pour up her arms and into the warm gold thing in her shoulder. And the gold drank it, the way it had drunk the cold of the river. And somewhere in her chest, she found the shape of a sound and made it low, almost nothing, more a hum in the bone than a thing in the throat. The herd settled, not slowly, all at once, the way the bank had gone silent the night of the river. One breath the does were tearing the snow apart, and the next they had stopped, ears swinging toward her, sides heaving, the white going out of their eyes. And a calf pushed its wet nose against her hip and stood there shaking, and the whole valley of animals went still and looked the useless girl standing in the middle of them with her hands a little out from her sides. Behind her, on the trampled snow, the men had stopped too. She had turned around and found every face she knew watching her, the same as the river, and Mathis at the front of them with that look on him again. The grave look, hungry and grieving in the same breath, and nobody said anything, and nobody had to. It became a thing they did after that. A doe would go off her feed, and they would bring Risten to lay a hand on her flank, and Risten would close her eyes and feel the calf turned wrong inside, and say so. This side. The calf is lying this side, and the men would turn the calf and it would live. She woke one morning and said a storm was coming, a bad one, 2 days out, and they struck the high camp and moved the herd down into the lee of the long ridge a full day before the sky gave any sign. And the storm came when she said it would, and broke over the empty high ground where they would have been. And they lost not one animal, and that night the whole clan ate well and warm in the shelter of the ridge, and a man she had never spoken to in her life touched her shoulder as he passed, the marked one, light, the way you touch a thing for luck. It went into her like drink. She would not have known to call it that, having never had drink, but it went in warm, and it loosened something, and it made her stupid with wanting more of it. To matter, to walk through the camp and have people quiet and step aside, not in contempt now, but in something that looked from the inside almost like respect. She had been hungry her whole life, and she had thought the hunger was only ever for food, and she found out that winter that there was a deeper hunger under that one, older, and that it had been starving longer, and that these people who had starved it were the ones now feeding it by the handful. And she ate that the way she ate everything, fast, in case it was taken back. Mathis kept her near. That was the part she turned over and over in the dark and could not make sit flat. The headman, who answered to no one, who the whole clan moved around, the way the herd moved around the lead doe, had taken to keeping the useless Giserlis at his side, and at first she had braced for the reason. The way she braced for the hand at her hair, and the reason had not come. He simply kept her near. On the long walks behind the herd, he would fall into step beside her and say nothing for an hour, and then point at a thing and give her its old name, that stone. A flat gray slab they passed at the mouth of the high valley, half buried, older than the turf houses, older than anyone. See, Edie, you give it the first of the milk in spring. The old people did, before the priests. My grandmother still did it when no one was looking. He walked on a few steps, the fat off the first reindeer killed. You put it on the stone. Why? So the stone is Steve-fed. He said it, the way you say, a thing you have stopped questioning. A fed thing lets you live near it. She filed the words away without knowing she was filing them. A fed thing lets you live near it. At the time, it was only the kind of old talk that made the place feel deep and made him feel close, his voice low beside her in the cold, breath of him hanging white over both of them as they walked. He taught her the stars, the names that were not the priests' names, great wandering one low in the north that the old people called the eye, and the long smear of light overhead that he said was a herd, a sky herd, driven across the dark every night by something he would not name even out there with no one to hear. He taught her which way the dead went, in the old belief. Down, not up. Down into the mountain through the gray stones, and she said that was backward. Everyone knew the dead went up, and he was quiet a long moment, and then he said no. Down. The mountain keeps them. And there had been something under his voice when he said it that she did not have a name for, yet a roughness. The sound a man makes stepping carefully around a hole in the dark. He spoke of a sister once. Only once and not all at once. The way he gave her everything, in pieces dropped along a walk. They were resting the herd at midday, and he was looking at nothing, at the gray stones up the far slope. And he said, "She would have liked you." And Risten did not know who he meant and was afraid to ask. And then he said, "My sister." She had a way with them too. The animals, he turned a strip of dried meat over in his fingers and did not eat it. She was younger than you. When? And he stopped at when, and did not go past it. And his jaw worked once, and he stood up and called the herd on. And that was all of the sister she got that day. A girl younger than her. Away with the animals. A when with nothing on the other side of it. She thought about the sister at night. She built her out of the pieces. She wanted, without letting herself look straight at the wanting, to be the thing that filled the hole the sister had left in him. And that was new, too. Wanting to fill a hole in another person, having spent her life being the hole in everyone else's. The closeness of it was a forbidden thing. And they both knew it, and neither said it. The headman and the girl who ate cold from the bottom of the pot. The clan saw it, and the clan said nothing, and Risten took the saying. Nothing for permission, the way she had taken all the other silences for permission, and she let herself walk a little nearer to him on the long walks, and once their hands had brushed reaching for the same calf, and neither of them had pulled away as fast as they should have, and she had carried the warmth of that small touch for 2 days like a coal in the chest. It was Barrett who broke it. Risten was alone in the small storehouse, counting the dried fish, a thing she had been given to do, now that she was given things to do. And she did not hear the old woman come in behind her, only felt the shift in the air, and turned. And Barrett Sarah was there in the low doorway, with the gray light behind her, so her face was all in shadow. "They have started leaving you with the herd at night," Barrett said. It was not a question. Risten said nothing. "Sleeping out, just you and the animals. Mathis arranges it." Barrett came in out of the doorway, and her face came into what little light there was, and it was not the flat, measuring face. It was the river bank face, the fear face, and her hands were not empty. "How long has it been now, since the water?" "I don't keep the days. I keep them." The old woman's eyes went over her, over the soft hands, over the fed look of her, the way you go over an animal you are deciding the worth of. 3 weeks, and some. They will not wait for the thaw. They are too afraid of it for that. They will do it on the dark night, the longest one, the way it was always done. And that is not so far off now. That is closer than you think, and I will not. Barrett stopped. Her jaw was shaking. "I will not stand by it again." "Stand by what?" Barrett Sarah crossed the small space faster than the old knees should have let her. And she had Risten's wrist again in the hard grip, the bruised one, and she pressed something into the palm and folded the fingers down over it. And it was cold, and it was a knife, a small curved one for the skinning. And she pushed Risten's own fisted hand up toward her own shoulder, toward the place where the golds slept, under the wool. And her face was wet now. The old woman was weeping, which was a thing Risten had never once imagined the dry old face could do. "Cut it out," Barrett said, low and fast and shaking. "You can still walk after. I walked after." "You cut it out now, tonight. You cut the whole of it out of your shoulder, and you burn the wound shut, and you go down the valley before they know. And you live, girl. You live a small life somewhere with a scar, and no one ever knowing. And that is the only road off this mountain there is. The only one. I am the only one who will ever tell you the—" The hide flap was thrown back. Light fell in. A man's shape in the doorway, one of Mathis's sent to fetch Risten to the headman, and Barrett Sarah stepped back from her so quick that the knife dropped between them and rang on the frozen floor, and the old woman's wet face went shut like a door, flat and cold again in a single breath. And she bent and snatched the knife up off the ground. "She was idle," Barrett said to the man, flat, contemptuous, the old voice exactly, "and I was setting her to skin the fish. That is all." And she pushed past him out into the gray and was gone. Risten stood with the bruise on her wrist and her heart going hard, and the old woman had not finished hanging in the cold storehouse with the smell of the fish. The truth. I am the only one who will ever tell you the truth. She did not know what to do with it. The old woman hated her. The old woman had always hated her, had named her useless to her face, had said, "Come, the thaw, she goes to the mission." And now the old woman had pressed a knife into her hand and wept, and told her to cut her own shoulder, open and run, and the two things would not fit together. And so Risten did what she had always done with things that would not fit. She pushed it down. She filed it with the fed stone and the down-going dead. She went to Mathis because Mathis was warm and the old woman was a knife in the dark, and a girl learns young which of those to walk toward. The stranger came 2 days after. She saw the light first. They had brought the herd down to the lower valley by then, closer to the timber and the river flat, and across the open ground in the long blue dusk there was a light that was not a clan light. Too white, too steady, swinging low to the ground in a slow searching arc, and she knew before anyone told her that it was wrong. A lantern, glass-sided, kind the priests had, the kind that came up from the country below. The man it belonged to came into the camp the next morning with 2 pack ponies and a boy to lead them and a book. That was the thing she could not stop looking at. The book. He carried it open in the crook of his arm wherever he went, and he wrote in it constantly in a fast scratching hand, and he wrote down everything: count of the houses, the count of the herd, the names. He went around the camp with the boy translating, and he asked each grown person their name and where they were born and whose child they were, and he wrote it all into the book in his straight black rose. And the clan answered him because he had a paper from somewhere below with a stamp on it that the boy said meant the law, and they were afraid of the law the way they were afraid of the weather, as a thing too large to argue with. His name was Lars Olsen. He said it to everyone, pointing at his own chest. Lars Olsen. As though it were a thing of value he was handing out. He measured. He had a long chain of marked links, and he and the boy walked it across the river flat again and again, and he drove little stakes into the half-frozen ground and tied rags to them. And he wrote, and Risten watched him cut the valley her people had walked for 1,000 years into squares, with his chain and his stakes and his straight black rose, and something about it frightened her in a way the gold in her shoulder never had. The mark was hot and living. This was cold. This was a man turning a place into lines on a paper. And she understood watching him, that a place that has been turned into lines on a paper is a place that is already half gone. He heard about her on the second day. She knew the moment he heard. The boy said something to him, low, and Olsen's head came up and turned, and his eyes found her across the camp, and they sharpened, the way the men's eyes sharpened over a fat doe. And he wrote something fast in the book, without looking down at it. He came toward her with the lantern boy trailing, and he stopped a few steps off, and looked at her shoulder, the wool over her shoulder, as though he could see through it. And he smiled a smile that did not reach above his mouth. "They tell me," he said, and the boy turned it into the clan tongue a beat behind him, "that this one is touched, that she carries a light." He tilted his head. Pen hovered. A heathen marvel. The society in Christiania pays well for such things. A drawing, a description. Perhaps the girl herself, if she is willing to travel. His eyes went over her once more, top to bottom, pricing. Quite a thing to bring down the mountain. Mathis was there before the boy finished translating. He came between them without seeming to hurry, his shoulder turning Olsen back a half step, and he said something short and flat to the surveyor in the trade tongue the lowland men used. And Olsen's mouth smile tightened, and the two men stood looking at each other, a moment, in the cold, with the boy gone silent between them, and then Olsen gave a small bow that was not a bow, more a tilt, and stepped back, and went off across the flat to his stakes and his chain and his book, and wrote something down. "Stay away from him," Mathis said to her. He did not look at the surveyor. He looked at her, and the grave look was there. But there was something new under it now, something that in another man she might have called fear. He does not want to help you. Men like him collect things. They put them in glass, and they take them away, and they label them, and the thing is never seen alive again. His hand came up and almost touched her shoulder and stopped. "You belong here," he said, low, rough. "With us. You understand. Not down there in a glass case with a paper name. Here." And the warmth of it went into her. "You belong here," the most wanted words she had ever been given. And she did not hear the cage in them. She heard only that the headman had stepped to between her and a man who would take her away, and had said she belonged, and she went warm all through, and she let herself stand a little nearer to him. And Olsen across the flat watched the two of them and turned a page. Mathis took her to the ruin the next afternoon. He said he wanted to show her something, and he took her up the old valley alone. The two of them. No dogs. The herd left with the men, and they climbed past the fed stone and up to the high place where the gray slabs stood, and she saw then that it was not just stones, that it had been a building once, a long time ago, before the turf houses, the broken arches of its still standing. Against the white sky, with the dead vines hanging off them, the old place the clan went around and did not go into. The place that lived at the edge of everyone's eye and was never spoken of. He walked her in through the broken arch like it was nothing, like he had done it many times. Inside, the snow had drifted against the standing stones, and the wind came through the gaps in the walls with a low note in it, and at the far end of the roofless space there was a wall still mostly whole, and carved into the wall, worn but readable, were the figures. People, a row of them. Standing figures cut into the rock by some hand dead 1,000 years. Down the shoulder and arm of every single one of them ran a branching line, a rootwork of lines, cut deep, and once, she saw, traced with something that had gone dark in the grooves, and it was her mark. It was exactly her mark. Same spreading veins down the same shoulder, figure after figure after figure along the worn wall, and beneath their feet, the rock had been cut flat and smooth into a kind of long, low table. A shelf of stone at the height of a laid body, swept clear of snow, and she understood without being told that things had been laid on it. "Who are they?" she said. Her voice came out small in the cold, roofless place. Mathis stood looking up at the carved figures with the grave look gone all the way open on his face now, no hunger left in it, only the grief, bare. "The given," he said. "Given to who?" He did not answer that. He reached up and laid his palm, flat, against one of the carved shoulders, against the cut veins, the way you lay a hand on the brow of someone in a fever. And he stood like that a long moment, and the wind came through the broken wall, and Risten looked at the long, swept shelf of stone at the height of a laid body, and felt the first cold finger of a thing she did not want to understand reach into her chest and begin very slowly to take hold. "The old people gave them," Mathis said, at last, "to the wall, not to her, when the herd failed. When the dark came too hard, and the famine years came one on the next, and the clan was dying. They gave the marked one to the mountain. Here, on the longest night, and the next year the herd came back, and the clan lived. His hand came down off the stone. It is only old talk now. The priests put a stop to it. My grandmother's grandmother saw the last of it done." He turned and looked at her and tried to smile, and the smile did not hold. "I only wanted you to see. So you would know what your mark was in the old days. So you would know it was a thing the old people thought was wholly a great thing. The greatest thing a person could be. The greatest thing a person could be." She heard the words. She heard him try to make them warm. She looked past him at the row of marked figures and the long stone shelf at body height, and the dark gone hard in the cut grooves of the carved veins, and she did not say anything, because the cold finger in her chest had reached all the way in now, and had hold of her heart, and she was afraid that if she opened her mouth, the thing she would say was the thing she was not yet ready to know she knew. He walked her back down before dark. He was gentle the whole way. Gentler than he had ever been, his hand finding the small of her back over the rough ground, his voice low and easy, naming the stars as they came out, the eye, the sky heard, down road of the dead. And she let him. And she walked close to him, and the warmth tried to come back and could not get all the way in past the cold finger. That night they left her with the herd, as they had taken to doing. Alone, out under the long ridge, the animals, dark shapes, breathing all around her in the snow, the fire she had been allowed a low red eye in the dark. She sat by it and she did not sleep. She traced the figures from memory, carved wall behind her eyes. She counted them, the standing marked figures along the stone, one and one and one, and she counted what she knew, the cold pot and then the warm, the cold corner and then the fur, the split hands healing soft, kept meat pressed into her palms the very night the gold had surfaced, not a day later, not when they had thought it over, but that same night, fast, as though it were a thing they already knew how to do. As though there were a shape to it they had only been waiting to use. A fed thing lets you live near it. The fat on the stones in spring. They will do it on the dark night, the longest one, the way it was always done, given. The longest night. That is closer than you think. She had thought they fed the useless out of a mercy they had finally found. She saw now, sitting alone in the dark with the herd breathing around her, that they did not feed the useless at all. They fed the chosen. They had always fed the chosen, fed them warm, and fed them well, and let them sleep near the fire, and laid the kept meat in their hands, and let them taste, for a few short weeks, what it was to matter, right up until the longest night, when they walked them up past the fed stone to the long stone shelf and gave them to the mountain. The fattening was not the opposite of the mission road. It was the same road. It only had a fire at the start of it, instead of a man in a black coat. She pressed her palm flat over her own shoulder, over the wool, over the place where the gold slept. It was warm under her hand, warmer than the rest of her. And as she pressed it, the warmth seemed to rise toward her palm, to lean into it, eager, glad, the way the herd leaned toward her. The way a dog leans into the hand of the master, walking it out into the dark. And she understood with the last of the cold finger, closing around her heart, that the thing in her shoulder was not afraid of the longest night at all. It knew exactly where it was being taken, and it wanted to go. The hands that washed her were warm, and that was the worst of it. Two women she had known her whole life, who had set the cold pot in front of her 100 times without looking at her face, knelt now in the smoke of the headman's house and washed her like a child, like something loved. Warm water, a cloth gone soft with use. They worked the river out of her hair and the dirt out from under her nails. And they did not meet her eyes while they did it, and their hands were gentle, and the gentleness sat on her skin like a sickness. They dressed her in white, not white the way snow is white. The old gray wool had been bleached and beaten soft and laid by, for this she understood now, kept the way the back fat was kept, against the worst night. And the cloth of it was finer than anything that had ever touched her body. And it smelled of nothing, scrubbed of every human smell, and they pulled it down over the mark and tied it at the shoulder with a cord, and she let them. She had let them all day. That was the thing she would turn over later, if there was a later. She had known since the night with the herd, known in the cold finger around her heart. And still, when they had come for her in the morning, she had let them, because a body that has spent its whole life being told what to do does not know, on the one day it matters, how to stop. They walked her up in the dark. Past the fed stone, she saw it in the moonlight as they went by, the flat gray slab, and she thought of the fat laid on it in spring. A fed thing lets you live near it. And she understood she was the fat now. She was the thing being carried up to be laid on the stone. So the rest of them could go on living near the mountain another year. The moon was full and low, and it threw their shadows long across the snow ahead of them. The whole clan strung out along the old path. No one carried a torch, because no one needed to. The snow gave the moonlight back so bright she could see the breath of the person in front of her hanging silver in the cold, hands at her elbows. Light, too light. The way you hold a thing you are afraid to mark. The broken arches came up black against the moon. They had been there before her. That was clear when they came in through the broken wall. Drifted snow had been swept from the long stone shelf and from the ground before it, and the dead vines had been pulled down and laid in a heap. Someone had brought up wood, old wood, gray and dry, stacked at the foot of the wall where the carved figures stood, and Risten looked at the marked figures in the moonlight, one and one along the worn stone. And then she looked at the swept shelf at the height of a laid body, and she stopped walking. The hands at her elbows did not pull. They waited. Clan came in behind her and arranged itself the old way, in a half ring open toward the shelf, the way she had seen them stand at the river, the way they stood around the lead doe. And they were quiet, and their faces in the moonlight were not cruel. That was the thing she could not get past, even then. There was no cruelty in any face she could see. There was something closer to grief, and something closer to relief. And on the youngest faces, something closer to fear. And on all of them, the heavy patience of people doing a thing they believe has to be done. Mathis came to stand in front of her. He had dressed for it, too. The good furs, the dark heavy ones from the river night, and the silver at his throat catching the moon, and his face when she made herself look at it, was open all the way. The grave look with nothing held back behind it. Now, no hunger left, only the grief bare and old and certain. "I am sorry it has to be the cold way," he said. "Lo, for her, the old people had herbs. We have lost the knowing of them. So, I will be quick, and I will be the one to do it, because you should not go to the stone by a hand that does not care for you." His jaw worked. "And I do care for you. You should know that. Whatever you think of me after, in whatever comes after, you should know it was not nothing to me. It was never nothing. You taught me the stars," she said. Her voice came out flat and far away, a stranger's. "You walked close to me. You let your hand find mine over the calf. You knew, whole time, you were fattening me. Yes." He did not look away from it. That was almost the worst, that he did not look away. "I wanted your last weeks to be good ones. You had nothing good before. I gave you what good I could, knowing what was coming, and I would do it again, because the alternative is worse." His eyes went bright in the moonlight, and his voice dropped lower still. "I had a sister, Inga. She had your mark and your way with the animals, and she was 11. And the famine years came one on the next, and the clan was dying, and they brought her up here to this stone, and they gave her, and I held the men off as long as a boy could. And then they held me back, and they gave her, and the next spring the herd came home." His breath shook out of him white. "It came home, Risten. The year after Inga, the herd came home. If that was nothing, if it was only old talk, and a child murdered for old talk, then my sister died for a story, and I helped hold the men off, and then I stopped. And it meant nothing. I cannot. I have carried it 10 years, and I cannot carry it as nothing. It has to have been holy. It has to have been the greatest thing she could have been. So when the river stripped your sleeve, and I saw her mark on your shoulder, I knew the mountain had sent it back to me to do right this time, do it as a man and not a held-back boy, and to make it mean something at last. She understood it then. The grave look. He had not been reaching for her at the river. He had been reaching for Inga. The reverence, the closeness, the warmth she had carried like a coal in her chest. None of it had been for her. He had been kneeling, all this time, the thing that took his sister. And she had walked into the warmth of his grief and mistaken it for love, the way she had mistaken every silence for permission, the way she had mistaken the fattening for mercy. "Lie down on the stone, Risten," he said, gently, and he had the knife now, the long one, out from the furs, the moon running pale down the length of it. "No," said Berit Sara. The old woman came out of the half-ring fast, the way she had come across the storehouse faster than the old knees should have let her, and she put herself between Risten and the stone, with her back to the shelf and her face to the clan, and her hands went to her own collar, and she tore it. She tore the white wool down off her own shoulder, the same fine, kept wool they had dressed Risten in, and she turned so the moon fell full on her bared shoulder, on the old skin, and there it was, a scar. A long puckered ruin of old scar tissue branching down from the top of her shoulder toward her elbow, the unmistakable shape of it under the silver light. A root work, a spreading of veins, but cut, gouged, the lines of it not glowing but dead white, and twisted where a blade had gone in deep, and torn the mark out by the roots, and left the body to heal, around the wound however it could. A sound went through the clan, the old ones. The oldest ones made the sound low, because the oldest ones remembered. "You all know me," Berit said. Her voice was not flat now. It shook and it carried. 40 winters I have kept your houses, and buried your dead, and held my tongue. You think I held my tongue out of nothing. I held it out of this. She struck her own bared shoulder with the flat of her hand. I was the chosen, the year of the second famine. They washed me. They dressed me in the white. They walked me up past the fed stone in the moon, and they were gentle. Oh, they were so gentle, the way you are gentle now. And I lay one night before, with a skinning knife I had stolen, and I cut my own mark, out of my own shoulder in the dark, so there would be nothing left for the mountain to want. And I came up to this stone in the morning, with the wound burned shut and bleeding through the White, and I showed them what I had done, and there was nothing to give. An unmarked girl is no gift. They sent me down. I lived, her chest heaved. I lived 40 years with this. And the herd came home those springs, too. Berit unmarked, and the herd still came home. Because it always comes home. It comes home in the springs we give a child, and the springs we do not. The mountain takes what we hand it, and gives back nothing it would not have, given anyway. And I have watched you tell yourselves the story for 40 years, and I have said nothing. And tonight, I am done saying nothing. She spun, and she had Risten's wrist, the bruised one, the third time now, and she slapped the small, curved skinning knife into the palm and folded the fingers down hard. Not to die, Berit said into her face. Low and fast and fierce, the storehouse words finished at last. To live. Cut it out. I lived. You cut the mark out of your shoulder, here, and now in front of all of them. And there is nothing left to give, and they have to let you down. Mountain, it is the only road off. I am the only one who ever told you the truth. Cut, girl, cut. And Risten stood there in the swept ruin under the full moon with a knife in her hand and 3 futures laid out in front of her like stones across a river. And for the first time in her whole used life, every hand in the world was reaching for her at once, and every one of them was reaching to take something away. Mathis, with his long knife, who wanted to lay her on the stone and make his dead sister mean something. Berit, with her old scar bared to the moon, who wanted her to carve herself hollow and walk down, ruined but breathing, the way the old woman had walked down, ruined but breathing 40 years before, and from the broken arch at the edge of the moonlight, a third. The white lantern light swung in across the snow, too steady, too cold, and Lars Olsen came in through the broken wall with the glass-sided lamp held up in one hand, and the book open in the crook of his other arm. Boy nowhere. Come up alone in the dark, following the only people for 100 miles, and he stopped just inside the wall, and his eyes went around the scene. The half-ring of clan, the swept stone, the old woman with her shoulder bared, the headman with the knife, the girl in white, and his face did not fill with horror. It filled with delight. "Do not stop," Olsen said, and his pen was already moving, scratching, his eyes flicking up and down between the people and the page. "I beg you, continue. I had heard you kept the old rites in these high valleys, but I never dreamed to witness one entire. A sacrifice, an authentic survival." He came a step closer, lifting the lantern higher, to throw its light across the carved wall, across the marked figures, and Risten saw him see the carvings and saw the joy of it go through him like drink. Extraordinary. The marked maiden, the moon, the ancestral stones. Christiania will not believe it. They will have to believe it. I have it here in my own hand. I am witness. He looked at Risten then, directly at the white dress and the cord at her shoulder, and he smiled the smile that did not reach above his mouth. Do not let me interrupt the girl. Whatever is done to her, I should like to record it precisely. For the science. For the science. He stood there in his good coat, with his glass lamp and his book of straight black rose, watching a child be readied for the knife, and the only thing in his face was the pleasure of a man who has found a rare specimen still alive enough to draw. And something in Risten, some last chord that had held her bent her whole life, some last silence she had taken for permission, came apart. She did not lie down on the stone. She did not cut the mark out of her shoulder. She did not stand still and let the man in the good coat write down what was done to her. She reached up with her free hand, and she pulled the cord at her shoulder, and she dragged the white wool down off her arm the way Barrett had, and she bared the mark to the moon, and she stopped pushing it down. Her whole life she had pushed it down, the herd breaking in the dark, and her lying still. The storms coming, and her saying nothing. The gold leaning into her palm, and her holding it, holding it, holding it. She let go. She let the thing in her shoulder have all of it. Wolves on the ridge, and the calves turned wrong in the womb, and the storms 2 days out, and the cold corner, and the cold pot, and the boy walked down the road, and the man with the lantern, pricing her like a doe, all of it. Every wrong thing she had swallowed for 16 winters, she opened her hand around it and let the gold drink. The mark took fire, not the thread of it from the river, not the spreading rootwork. All of it at once, the whole shoulder, the whole arm, blazing up gold so bright the swept ruin went white with it, brighter than the moon, brighter than the lantern. The carved figures on the wall, leaping out of the dark, suddenly lit, the half-ring of clan throwing their arms up across their faces, the snow blazing back the light until the whole broken place was on fire with it, and not a flame anywhere yet. Lars Olsen cried out and stumbled back from the light, and the glass lantern went out of his hand. It struck the heaped dry vines at the foot of the wall. The old gray wood stacked for the fire that was meant to come after. And the glass broke, and the oil ran, and the real fire caught all at once, leaping up the stacked wood and into the dead vines, and up the ancient timbers that had stood dry under the broken roof 1,000 years, and it went up fast. It went up like the place had been waiting for it, and now there was flame, and there was the gold, and there was the moon, all at once, and the ruin filled with light and heat and the roar of dry wood taking, and the clan broke. That was the word for it. They broke the way the herd broke. The half-ring came apart. People falling back from the fire and the gold, and the screaming foreigner, the certainty that had held them all the way up the mountain shattering in the heat. And in the breaking of it, there was a gap, a way through, the broken arch standing open with the moon beyond it, and the cold, clean snow. Risten walked out. She did not run. She would think about that after. She did not run. She walked, blazing, through the gap in the people who had washed her and dressed her and carried her up to die, and they fell back from her. They pulled their children's hands against their chests the way the mother had at the river, as though the light might be catching. And not one hand reached out to stop her. because the thing walking out of Ups was no longer a useless girl, or a chosen one, or a specimen. It was something lit from the inside that they had spent their lives being afraid of. And a clan knows when to fall back from a thing. She passed Mathis last. He had not moved. He stood between the stone and the fire, with the long knife loose in his hand and the flames climbing the wall behind him, and his face in the firelight was not the grave look anymore. The grave look had broken with the rest of it. What was under it was a boy's face, an 11 years held boy's face, and his eyes went from her to the burning wall, where the carved figures stood, blackening in the heat, the marked figures, the given, going dark one by one as the fire took them, and his mouth opened, and no order came out of it. "It came home anyway," Risten said to him, passing. "Quiet, not cruel, just true. Bear it unmarked. The spring's without a child. It always came home. She died for the story you needed it to be." And she walked out through the broken arch into the moon. Behind her, in the burning ruin, Mathis Gaup went down onto his knees in the snow the way he had gone down in the river. And this time it was not reverence. And this time there was no one to see it but the fire. And the most feared man in the valley knelt
and put his
hands over his face and wept for his sister. At last, for Inga, 11 years old, given for nothing, dead for a story, and the carved figures blackened and fell off the wall in pieces around him, and the holy thing he had made of his grief to survive it burned down to ordinary ash in the light of an ordinary fire. Barrett Sarah walked down the mountain alone that night. She did not go after the girl, and she did not go back to the houses. She went down the old path in the moonlight with her torn collar still open and her old scar bared to the cold, and she walked lighter than she had walked in 40 winters, the weight of the unsaid thing finally outside her body, lying back there in the burning ruin in the words she had finally said. And she did not weep, and she did not pray. She only walked, an old woman going down a mountain in the dark with nothing left to keep. Risten crossed the border ridge at dawn. The fire was a long way behind her by then, a red smear low in the dark valley at her back, and the sky ahead over the ridge had gone the gray that comes before the sun, and her feet had taken her up and over without her telling them to, up out of the high country toward the pass where the land fell away into a country she had never seen and no clan owned. The white dress was gray with smoke and torn at the shoulder. The cord hung loose. Under it the mark had gone quiet, the fire of it banked down to almost nothing. The molten gold cooled to thin lines of pale silver under her skin, faint, barely there, sleeping, the way it had slept her whole life before the river found it. She stopped at the top of the ridge. Below her, on the far side, the land ran down gray and unmarked toward a country she did not know. Behind her, down in the dark valley, the fire burned, and past the fire, on the river flat, she knew the little stakes with their rags still stood in rows where Lars Olsen had driven them, chains still coiled by the ponies. The book of straight black rows, waiting to be carried down to the men below, who would turn the whole valley her. People had walked for 1,000 years into lines on a paper, into squares, into law, and would empty it of clan and herd and turf house within the 10 years coming, whether or not a girl had ever glowed in the dark, whether or not a single child was ever again laid on the stone. The mountain had never been the thing that was going to take them. The mountain had only ever taken what they handed it. The thing that was coming for them was cold, and it was patient, and it carried a book, and it did not believe in marks at all. and it would win. She did not look back at any of it. She went over the ridge and down the far side into the gray, owned by no clan and no mountain and no man and no map, and the snow came down soft behind her as she went, and it filled her tracks as fast as she made them. One footprint and then no footprint, so that by the time the sun came up over the valley there was no sign at all that the useless girl had ever come this way, or any way, or had ever been anything that anyone could keep.
If you have been holding your breath through this last climb the way I have, do me one small thing before you go. Tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from. What city, what country, what hour it is in your dark right now, because Risten walked out of her valley, owned by no one and no map. And I want to see all the places on this earth her story reached. And if any part of you was pulling for her to walk out through that fire on her own 2 feet, and not be the gift, not be the specimen, not be anybody's debt. Then like this, share it with the one person you know who needs to hear that they were never the useless one, and subscribe and turn on the bell. Because the next soul I follow up a dark mountain is going to need you watching too.